Hello everybody, my name is Benjamin Wheeler, and today I have a Born of the Gods set review for the Canadian Highlander or Pointslander format. Basically, I will be going through select cards from the set that I feel have potential of making some sort of splash within the format. But before I go into the individual choices I've made, I'd like to give a quick overview of the Born of the Gods set. Now, it seems only fitting for a set that has a Punisher mechanic in the form of tribute to have cards like this, but I feel that this set has an overwhelming amount of what I have been referring to as trap cards. They seem neat or interesting, potentially powerful cards, but chances are there are better alternatives. Remember, we have pretty much every card that's ever been printed at our disposal. So we might as well use the best option. I know many players will want to play with these newer cards, but I think when you are constructing a deck or developing an archetype, it's important to look at all of the possibilities. I will touch on which cards fall under this category as I get to them. Another thing that certain cards fall victim to is that they're more niche cards. They're not cards that fit into every single archetype or multiple archetypes. They instead fit a specific role in a specific strategy. And the strategies that they fit into aren't, for lack of a better term, they aren't tier 1. They're neat, they're exciting, they're cool, interesting, and really embrace what the Highlander format is about, being able to have the opportunity to play whatever you'd like. But they come at a risk, as they're often somewhat narrow and require quite a lot of commitment to that specific strategy. All that said, I think there are a couple exciting cards in this set. There are certainly several cards that I personally see as immediate includes into pre-existing archetypes. But enough of me blabbing about. Let's go right into the set. The first card we have is the Hero of Arohas. Now, this hero falls under the niche card category. It's a 2-mana 2/2 soldier. Or spells you cast cost 1 less. Has a heroic trigger, you get a 1/1 counter on it. So this is a niche card because it requires you to play auras in order for it to be truly effective. Otherwise, it's just a 2/2 for 2 that has a heroic trigger. Nothing exciting. What is exciting, though, is that cards that reduce the cost of specific card types have the potential to be very powerful. But auras traditionally aren't that powerful, as there is a very big risk behind playing with them. There's always the potential to being blown out by a removal spell of sorts, or future combat tricks by removing the auras themselves. However, there is an existing Enchantress shell, and in the Enchantress shell, there are possible options such as Yavimaya Enchantress or Ancestral Mask to take more of a beat-down, win-out-of-nowhere approach rather than the grind them out with propaganda effects and solitary confinement. And I think if somebody were looking to take that approach with the Enchantress strategy, the hero will certainly fit in. Again, very niche, but it's neat, it's exciting, and there's a lot of potential. I feel like if cards like this go unchecked, then they can just steal a game. That said, cards like this are very easily, checked. It's only a 2/2, and it has no real evasive abilities. And there is the potential for those strategies to get blown out if their main engine, like the hero or like a core spirit dancer, gets removed entirely. Personally, I could see myself tinkering with this, not realistically playing it myself, as I don't necessarily have the cards or want to commit to such a deep strategy like that, but I can certainly see it making a splash at tables. Moving on to a more straightforward card, we have Xenagos, God of Rebels. Xenagos is a part of the new multicolor god cycle, in which instead of requiring 5 devotion from one specific color, it requires 7 or greater devotion from both colors. You can have 7 red devotion to turn on Xenagos. You can have 7 green, but you can also have a mix. So basically, it's somewhat harder to achieve, as these gods require you to commit overall more things, and they often cost more mana than the original gods. That said, these gods, their abilities are where they really shine. So having a 5 mana 6/5 indestructible creature that your opponent has access to turn off and on by removal to blow out other cards, not that exciting. But for cards like Xenagos, with an ability at the beginning of your combat on your turn, another target creature you control gains haste and gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. That is where this card really shines. And for Xenagos in particular, being a 5 mana threat that is not easily disrupted by archetypes that the red-green aggression decks, the Naya aggression, the Jund aggression decks don't particularly enjoy facing, that is a very impressive quality to have. It tops out the curve for these strategies. 5 drops aren't usually played that much, but 1 or 2 is the norm. Usually a Thundermaw Hellkite or a what's it called? Stormbreath Dragon. Those type of cards, a Baneslayer Angel even, really just top the curve. The problem is those cards are quite susceptible to a bribery. But Xenagos, on the other hand, is not. It impacts the board the turn it comes into play. If it's a creature, great. If it isn't, that's fine. You can end up just boosting your 4-drop that came into play. And that 4-drop gets an increase based on its power, which is very important, as the 4-drops that you will find in red and green, such as Hero of Oxid Ridge or Flame Tongue Kabu, they have a higher power than toughness. So by Xenagos' ability checking the creature's power rather than power and toughness, it makes the buff from the ability overall more impressive. This god is probably my favorite god in the set, or at least the god that I feel will have the largest impact. It's certainly one of the cards that I believe will become an immediate inclusion to strategies that can efficiently utilize this. However, the next god we have up, Mogis, God of Slaughter, I'm not as sure. This card feels somewhat like a trap. Certainly a 7/5 for 4 indestructible is very impressive, and getting devotion to black and red isn't that difficult, as black and red likes to clog the board with creatures. Stuff like Ashenmoor Gouger, Boggart Ramgang really just add to getting this card online. That said, his ability at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Mogis deals 2 damage to that player unless he or she sacrifices a creature. I can't really see them actually sacrificing a creature. It feels kind of like this Punisher mechanic kind of nod. And it's not that impressive to me. Not really. Sure, 2 damage a turn is alright, and Mogis at least does something somewhat relevant to a black-green aggressive deck strategy while it isn't a creature. But again, 2 damage isn't that impressive, and most decks can shrug that off. If it prevented life gain, say, then fantastic. We've got another Sulfuric Vortex on our hands. But it doesn't. And so this is contrary to my statement that these gods focus more on their ability. I feel like Mogis is the exception, where if you're playing this, the ability is nice, but you're really hoping to have that 7/5 indestructible. Next up, we have a non-god card, although it does make a nod to a very powerful card type Kyora's follower, obviously the nod to the Planeswalker that we'll be covering soon. 2 mana 2/2, tapped on tap target, another target permanent. It's not going to be untapping any time vaults given the color configuration. It seems a little weak for that kind of strategy, but it could be untapping Gaia's Cradles or other creatures with very strong abilities, such as Priest of Titania. What I'm getting at is I feel like this card could make a splash in the blue-green Gaia's Cradle decks, or the mono-green decks that have a little bit of blue, for stuff such as Mystical Tutor or Show and Tell. It has potential. It's a shame it's not an elf, but if it were an elf, I doubt it would really be following Kiora. Back to another god, we have Afera, God of the Polist, 4 mana 6/5 indestructible. Good body for the cost. Seems a bit odd for, I guess it has white in it, and white is traditionally known for aggressive creatures. But a 6/5 for 4 that checks blue devotion it's a good card. I like this god. At the beginning of each upkeep, if you had another creature enter the battlefield under your control last turn, draw a card. So blue and white has quite a lot of flash creatures. This allows you to trigger this ability on by casting a creature on their turn. It also checks for cards like Aether Vial, or for Rebels, EOT bringing in another Rebel. Although maybe these situations aren't necessarily realistic. If you throw Afera into the white weenie decks that splash blue, or the blue-white kind of counter-rebel tempo aggro decks, then I think she has the possibility to be drawing more than just one card on your upkeep. Or their upkeep, I guess, sorry. I like her. I think she's a bit of a sleeper for the gods. And I don't think people will be jumping into playing her immediately, but she's definitely worth testing out. And if it turns out she doesn't do anything, that's fine. It's understandable. But if she does, again, I wouldn't be that surprised. Now, going to what I feel is the best and probably the only actually good tribute card in the set, we have Fanatic of Xenagos. So it's traditionally Punisher mechanic cards or Punisher cards such as Browbeat or Breaking Point, they never really give you what you want. Cards red decks, mono red decks will play Browbeat because both sides of the coin fit what the strategy is trying to do, or at least they're not against drawing 3 cards. And if you dome them for 5, fantastic. But other than Browbeat, there isn't really any impressive cards with the Punisher mechanic. But Fanatic of Xenagos, both sides seem to fit what a red-green creature-based deck is trying to do. If they pay tribute, then you have a 3 mana 4/4 Trampler. Seems good. Sometimes this card will come down on turn 2. If they don't pay tribute, then you have a 3 mana 3/3 Trampler that's still fine. And the turn it comes into play, it gets +1/+1 haste, so you get to crack for 4 without any real possibility of a profitable chump block because of the trample. Also, having that on turn 2 seems fine. If they kill it, they kill it. It doesn't have any protection or evasions, but you're playing a red-green deck and you're not really looking for that. I think this card's great. It's, again, one of the cards that will probably end up in multiple people's decks the first tournament after the pre-release, as it's also easy to get at uncommon. Great card. Look forward. Well, I don't personally look forward to fighting against it, as it's quite good, but I can certainly see it popping up in lists time after time after time. Now onto something more boring. We have Swordwise Centaur. It's a 2 mana 3/2. That's it. It's a bread and butter card. It's not all that impressive, but it's kind of necessary. For Wizards keeps putting out, especially in that Theros block that has such an emphasis on devotion and mana costs and playing mono-colored strategies, that card decks like mono black aggro, mono green aggro, and even something like Sea Stompy or Ride the Demon Stompy they're getting these cards that fit that archetype, that allow them to play more straightforward cards than less than impressive alternatives that the deck might play. So is a mono green aggressive deck going to be jumping for joy that it got a 2-mana 3/2? Probably not, but I think it gives a player that's constructing a deck on that archetype just an easy throw in. They get to throw this card in and say, well, it fits the bill, and then they get to pick what kind of niche cards or pocket cards they want to include. Speaking of niche, we have Hero of Lena Tower. 1-mana 1/1 heroic. The heroic trigger is an X, though. If you target it, you can pay X and then put that many counters, as opposed to the traditional, if you target it, you just get 1. So I say this is a niche card because I feel like this card has some kind of potential to show up in the 5-color, 4-color, 1-drop with pump spells decks. The kind of all in on 1-drop zoo decks that play Might of Gaia, Gaia's Might, Might of Alara, Might of Old Krosa, cards that cost 1 green that have the word might in their name. Giant Growth, all those kind of cards. I feel like it's a threat that they can put out for cheap, and they can use a pump spell and then use any additional mana that deck draws. That deck hates drawing more than 2 or 3 mana, but this card lets you apply additional pressure without having to use additional cards, which most decks don't exactly want to run out 18 creatures on the battlefield and then just get blown out by a Wrath of God. There's an archetype for it. It seems neat, seems cool. Will we see it immediately? Probably not. But to those that are a fan of playing that kind of strategy or have always wanted to toy with that strategy, might I suggest the Hero. Another green card in the list, we have Courser of Kruphix, 3-mana 2/4. This card is I don't want to say it's a mini, it's kind of a mini Oracle Moldiah, and it's kind of a mini Brazen Gladeheart. It doesn't let you play additional lands off the top of your library, but being able to play lands off the top of your library when the conditions are met is quite convenient. Gaining 1 life a turn, also, it's not what Brazen Gladeheart was, but the real benefit to playing this card is that it's an additional creature that somewhat fills those roles, which those decks are looking forward to playing. Also worth mentioning, it's got a big butt. So you're not exactly looking to block with your Oracle Moldiah or your Brazen Gladeheart, but with the Courser, you can safely block if they have some kind of burn spell or a pump spell or whatever. You're still goozled, but you'd probably be goozled anyways. What I'm trying to say is that this card can block, and this card also with 2 power can prevent your opponents from making attacks, which is great for such a defensive strategy that would want to play this. I can see this card easily fitting into loam-based decks, turbo land decks, all that jazz. I look forward to playing with this card myself. A trap card approaches. We have Satyr Fire Dancer. 2-mana 1/1. Instants or sorceries you control, when they deal damage to an opponent, the Fire Dancer deals that much damage to target creature. I don't know if this card does anything. I mean, if they have creatures and you throw a Lava Spike at them and then you get to dome out their creature, fantastic. But I don't know how often this will actually come up. That said, the decks that traditionally didn't run many creatures, such as the blue-white control decks, have turned to playing more kind of token-based cards, such as Lingering Souls or even Spectral Possession. So this card has more applications than it would have if it were printed a year ago or so. Again, I don't know if this card does anything. There's a chance that it's just a 2-mana 1/1, and that isn't exactly great. Not to mention the red decks for 2 drops. There are certainly plenty of options, and I don't know if this card actually beats out any of the other alternatives. Moving on to something equally, well, no, it's even less exciting than the Fire Dancer. We have a 2-mana 2/1 that you pay 1, sacrifice it, and destroy target artifact. We've seen this before. Torch Fiend, I believe is its name. just kind of another Hearth Colony kind of variation. If the deck played Torch Fiend, you could play the Reveler in its place or alongside it if you really hate Worn Power Stones that much. The choice, however, is up to you whether you want to have a card with creature type Devil or if you want to have the sick art of the Satyr burning down a Trojan horse. That's the beauty of Highlander. You get to customize. Included in this list, I have Oracle of Bones for potential cards, but now that I'm thinking about it, now that I mentioned it on Fanatic of Xenagos, I don't know if I want to have the Oracle on here. It seems like a trap, seems like a bad Keldon champion, and seems like there are too many requirements for it to do anything. So I'm probably going to skip this card. If you personally feel like this card has applications and decent applications, I'm not talking about magical Christmas land applications, feel free to mention it to me, comment on the video, or comment on the Facebook page over its lack of presence on this list. If I could delete it from this, I would, but I'm already about 20 minutes or so in this. I haven't actually checked. Moving on, we have Herald of Torment. Unfortunately, this card, you won't be riding this demon anytime soon, as it has double black as opposed to colorless mana. So casting this turn 1 off of a Moxen and a City of Traders or Soul Land or whatnot will not be happening, unfortunately. But it's still a 3-mana 3/3 flyer. You lose 1 life, but that doesn't matter. Mono black aggressive decks have played much worse cards than this. And the Bestow ability might actually be relevant. I think this card's great. I think this card will certainly see play in the mono-black aggressive decks, potentially even the red-black aggressive decks. Flying is huge, and 3 damage a turn with evasion isn't anything to scoff at. Also, Ritual this guy in on turn 1. He's no hippie, but he puts in work. Coming up, we have Vanguard of Brimaz. This card doesn't do that much. It's a 2-mana 2/2 Vigilance. It also has a soldier creature type, and the Heroic Trigger puts in more soldiers with Vigilance. That's really the reason I've included it on this list. If you're playing a soldier-based deck along the White Weenie strategy, you certainly should consider playing this, especially if you have more combat tricks than usual. Stuff like Harm's Way or Shelter, not Brave the Elements, Stave Off, Apostle's Blessing, those kind of cards, those kind of protection spells. Because people, if this card gets out of hand, it can take over the game, and people will want to kill it because it seems fragile. So having those spells alongside this guy will certainly lead to a board state where you don't necessarily have to cast more creatures to apply pressure. You just have to protect your own creatures. And in an aggressive matchup, giving your guy protection, then creating more creatures that also have Vigilance, because Vigilance is huge. Being able to smack and then protect, especially alongside an Anthem, this guy can get out of hand. He kind of falls in this category of other cards on this list where if he sees play, fantastic. If he doesn't, I wouldn't be that surprised. It requires a certain special someone to think, hey, this card would be neat. Also, he's a cat. That might cause more people to want to play him. And also the tokens he makes are cats. So he's got that going for him, right? Right? Okay, let's move on to a 2-drop in white that will most certainly see play immediately. We have Spirit of the Labyrinth. If you are playing some kind of white-based aggression deck that isn't the white-blue tempo lists, slam this guy in. She is absolutely fantastic. 3/1 for 2, great. That's fine. Would I say play Blade of the Six Pride in certain decks? Well, yes, I have, and I certainly would. But this card is much better than that, as it restricts blue players and black players alike from drawing those pesky additional cards that can just get out of hand, and the white weenie players do not want to see that. Also worth noting, she is an enchantment. So while that can come at a risk of them being able to disenchant the spirit, or Wickerbow Elder the spirit, she is able to be found via Enlightened Tutor, which certain White Weenie based decks could play as searching up a Winter Orb or Spirit of the Labyrinth. can really throw a wrench in the works of a more controlling based strategy. She's fantastic. I don't know what to say about her other than what has been said by the internet since she was spoiled. Back to the more boring cards included on this list. We have Loyal Pegasus. That's it. It's a Mog Flunkies that flies for 1. It's kind of like a War Falcon in that there is a potential for you to be blown out, and then you just have this Pegasus that's not doing anything. There is a White Weenie base deck, or even a red-white all-in base deck that could play this, but don't go slamming it into every build. That said, here's a card that I would go slamming into every build. We have Brimaz. This guy is absurd. He slices, he dices, he blocks, he attacks, and his creatures block and attack. Why play the Vanguard when you can play Brimaz? Maybe you only have 2 mana sources in your entire list and you happen to get them. So you can cast the Vanguard, but you couldn't cast Brimaz. That's the only scenario I can think you'd want to play the Vanguard over this guy. Sometimes you'll play them together. But Brimaz will go into every white mono-white list and possibly every green-white list, with even the potential of being seen in Naya and Bant. As it's, I could even see this guy in control now that I'm thinking about it. He's defensive enough that he's very good against opposing aggression decks. And for a control deck to have this as an option versus other control decks, that might be a little niche scenario that some people haven't thought about. Is that good? I don't know. Haven't tried it out yet. But again, this card is a lot like Spirit in the Labyrinth, and that it's being talked about non-stop since it was spoiled. It's the best card in the set. It's the most talked about, expensive card in the set. I'm sure there are people that can do this card better justice for praises than I. If you're playing white and have access to it, play it. Another card at 1 white that isn't as impressive, we have Archetype of Courage. 3 mana, 2/2, Soldier. Creatures you control have first strike. Creatures your opponents control lose first strike and can't have first strike. Again, if you're playing a soldier-based White Weenie deck that has every soldier lord you can imagine, this guy is just another card to add into there. I do think that deck is real and has potential for those naysayers that say soldier-based. Oh, that's poppycock. But this guy has applications. Also, he's an enchantment, so again, you can Enlighten Tutor for him. But that's all that said, all the other soldier lords kind of do what this guy does, but better. They typically give them first strike and some kind of offensive bonus, or they put more guys into play or something like that. So he's worth considering if you're playing that archetype, but don't go slamming him into your basic White Weenie deck. Ending our list of creatures, we have the last god that is somehow categorized in the god category. What is going on, Cockatrice? We have Karametra, God of Harvest. I really only included this card because it has a special little place in my heart. Look at that art. That is fantastic art. It's a 5 mana 6/7 indestructible, obviously. And when you cast a creature spell, you may get a forest or plains into the battlefield tapped. So you can grab your Dryad Arbor, you can grab your dual lands. I feel like this card looks somewhat neat, but it's probably it's probably better suited for a commander strategy. The only places that I could see this popping up don't really benefit from that much. When you're looking to ramp beyond that and you're casting your big creatures following 5-drops, usually those big creatures are going to be your game winners, and searching for more lands doesn't really do much. And then if you reach 5 mana and you just have a bunch of little dorks and you're looking to grind out value after this in something like a Gaia's Cradle strategy, then you're a little disappointed that on turn 6 you are casting, or I guess if you're playing Gaia's Cradle, you're casting this thing on like turn 3. That on turn, your follow-up creatures on turn 3 or 4, searching out a land doesn't actually do that much. Again, I'll probably play this thing once or twice, and if other people want to play this thing, don't let my comments tell you otherwise. Feel free to play with it. It has potential, and that's what this list is all about. Not all these cards are sure things. Some of them are. up Brimaz. But there's certainly room in this format for her to make some kind of splash. Moving on to our instance, we have Aspect of Hydra. I had this card in the bottom sideboard category, which I will be covering at the end of the video for cards that I think people might want to play but certainly shouldn't. And then I kind of changed my mind. There are definitely decks that want to play every possible pump spell they can that will give their creature more than +3/+3. And this card can do that. It's more susceptible to the caster being completely blown out, which most pump spells are already kind of just dead to a Doomblade. But this card is dead to a Lightning Bolt on a different creature, or removal of any other permanent that will add to the devotion, which is a bit poo-poo. But that said, there's also the chance that Magical Christmas Land, you just load somebody out and give something +6/+6 and then they die. This card has room to see play. If you really want to squeeze in that extra pump spell, this is probably the pump spell you want to squeeze in. That said, there is a lot, and I repeat, a lot of risk of casting this. Coming up, we have Searing Blood. I'd say just play Searing Blaze. This card certainly has applications in the format in that you don't need to hit landfall, which for mono red, sitting on 2 mana, sure it can operate. But if you didn't need to cast Searing Blaze the second you hit that second land drop, then you're kind of goozled with this 2 mana spell that only does 1 damage apiece. Searing Blood, however, doesn't necessarily discriminate against those that aren't making their land drops. Just shocks the creature, and then if that thing dies, it deals 3 damage to that creature's controller. You can also just shock a creature that has more damage on it, it dies, and then you get the trigger. It's fine. Again, they're much like other cards I've mentioned. There are probably better cards out there for the job, such as Searing Blaze, and the spot in mono red or red-based strategies that want cards like this is already quite competitive. So I don't necessarily know if this card will show up in every list. I feel like people will want to play with it because they look at it and say, hey, this card does something and it's new. I'm going to try it out. And I think that's the extent of what this card will do. It will get tried out. Speaking of cards that have potentially better alternatives, we have Bile Blight. 2 mana, target creature and all other creatures with the same name as that creature get -3/-3. Realistically, if you're playing a spell that is double black and looking to get rid of a 3-drop creature, you're probably playing some kind of heavy black-based aggression. And if you're playing that, you're probably the only person in the room playing that. So you don't really have to worry about killing off their pulse tracker and then your pulse tracker dying. Oh god, it's the worst terror any Sui black player could come across. No, this card is probably just killing something with 3 toughness or less, or just getting rid of pesky spirit tokens that are in your way, or those Elspeth tokens that have been racking up. This card's fine. There are probably, if you are that worried, there are probably better alternatives to this card. Actually, there are definitely better alternatives to cards, stuff like Nameless Inversion or Grasp of Darkness. But it's worth mentioning, and it's certainly worth trying out. I don't think there's that much of a risk to actually just screwing over yourself. Then we have Drown in Sorrow. Decks, there are decks that play Infest. To the decks that play Infest, play Drown of Sorrow instead. That's really it. Although Toxic Deluge is a card, guys. We have then 3 lands. There's Scry lands for blue-white, black-red, green-white. I don't think the green-white one will see that much play. Not even in some slow, grindy, everything comes into play tapped Bant deck. Temple of Malice, maybe in the Grixis lists. I'm frankly not an expert on Grixis, but I typically see that deck liking to play sources that come into play untapped. And then we have Temple of Enlightenment. I think blue-white is going to be one of the lists that doesn't actually care as much if certain lands come into play tapped. It is definitely awkward if you're looking to hit that land for a Wrath of God and then you see this temple. But being able to scry for one is quite nice. This one in particular is just a better new Benalia, unless your new Benalia has a chicken drawn on it. But we can't all have the chicken Benalia. I think this card's good. Probably the best temple out of the three. If you don't want to play him, fine then. That's perfectly acceptable. Nobody's going to chew you out for choosing so. And then, last but not least, we have Alex Bertoncini, the Crashing Wave. Sorry, I meant Kiora. We have Kiora, the Crashing Wave. Exciting new Planeswalker, blue-green. Whoa! Bro, 2 loyalty. Boo. This card dies. It appears that it dies to pretty much everything. The first ability can certainly help lock up the game. +1 until your next turn. Prevent all damage that will be dealt to and dealt by target permanent opponent controls. That's fine if they have only one permanent. And if you're playing decks like this, you're probably playing some kind of Wrath of God effects beside it, or some kind of propaganda, or Wall of Omens, kind of Wall of Blossoms strategies. So there's a chance that this ability is just much better than I'm making it out to be. That said, it requires you to have additional cards aside from Kiora. The first ability also works quite well with planeswalkers, other planeswalkers, that said. It's worth noting though that other planeswalkers that have also have abilities that protect themselves in this way, such as, let's go with Garrick Wildspeaker. Garrick creates these 3/3s that can protect him, and also will require your opponent to trade resources. If they want to get rid of it, they have to kill the beast. So that's a card for this token. Or they'll have to attack into it. Sometimes the token is smaller than their creature, and sure. But then Garrick's alive, so it's done its job. That said, Kiora doesn't require them. I guess in a way it requires them to commit more. So there is a possibility that I am just underselling this positive ability. But that's the thing with Planeswalkers, is that their power is somewhat deceptive. When Jace came out, people said it was just a 4-mana sorcery brainstorm. But it's a card you definitely have to play with. And there are archetypes where you can play with it. Hell, the second ability, draw a card, and you can play an additional land. It's an Explorer. There are decks that would love to have multiple Explorers. And the -5 ability, I guess if you're playing this in decks that want Explorers and have like Wall of Blossom effects, you're probably playing some kind of Time Warp. So you're playing, let's say, having this card in like a blue-green Turbo Land strategy, which you can most certainly get out on turn 3 from Rampant Growth effects, would be fantastic. So I think Kiora has archetypes that she will fit into quite easily, and people will want to play with her because she's a sweet new Planeswalker and sweet color patterns. But there's a risk in playing her. There's a risk in playing pretty much all the cards in this set, another recurring theme. But I do think she has a spot. She has a home, and she has players that will do their best to play her to her best potential. That has been all the cards I would suggest people play or try out or look into for Born of the Gods. But we have one little straggler that I would like to talk about. We have Painseer. I hate this card. It is not a Dark Confidant. And I would rather see a player that is looking to play Painseer probably play Blood Scrivener. It's a human wizard, so it's got that going for it. And it has an extra toughness, which Scrivener doesn't have. But realistically, attacking on turn 3 with a 2/2. So first off, it has to survive the first turn. As a 2/2, it's quite fragile. And then it has to successfully attack the next turn, which as a 2/2 in Highlander, attacking on turn 3, unless you're playing white spells, is somewhat difficult. Sure, you're in black, so there's plenty of potential for removal and other supporting cards to clear the way, but then you're using up a card. You're going 1-for-1 potentially for what they have, and then you're smacking for 2. And then you hope to God it survives one more turn, because then on turn 4 or turn 3, if you manage to get a Moxen, you sack. You get to draw a card and lose a life. Obviously, this card's not Bob. They would be stupid to print another Bob. This card is a trap. This card summarizes everything negative about Born of the Gods, and this card is incredibly overhyped. If you want to play with it, be my guest. But this is one of the few cards on the list that I will stress that you take my word for. Please do not play your Painseers. Trade them while they're at $10 each or whatever ludicrous overhyped value they're sitting at. But do not play it, because I personally think it's quite awful. Wow, that was quite a negative note to end on. Well, but thank you for joining me for this video. I'd like to apologize for if my voice had some kind of poor quality to it, as I have been sick for the past week or so, and I really just wanted to get this video out, rather than seem like I'm just sitting on my ass and procrastinating. Also, the mic I'm using isn't the best, but I'm looking to get a better, more high quality microphone, especially if there is interest in more videos on set reviews, deck techs, even interviews, discussions, or playthroughs similar to how Tavris does, playing people over cockatrice. Other than that, thank you for joining me. My name has been Benjamin Wheeler, and I look forward to seeing you all at the Highlander tables. Cheers.